The buzzards always came first. High above the desert, they circled in slow, patient loops, knowing death was near long before the body stilled. One of them landed beside the twisted tree, where a girl lay motionless, her skin blistered, her lips split and dry. Her wrists were bound cruelly with rough hemp raw with blood and dust. She hadn't moved in hours, or maybe days. But down the dirt path far off across the shimmer of heat, a horse's shadow flickered. Thomas McCrae didn't come to save anyone. He never did. That part of him had died long ago, buried with the names he no longer spoke. His horse Whiskey moved slow and deliberate through the sand, like its rider too old for rush and too bitter for detours. He saw the body. At first he kept riding. He'd seen plenty like it, women, men, children left behind by cruelty or cowardice or both. But something made him glance back. Not at the girl, at the rope. It was tied wrong. Not the kind of knot meant to kill fast, but one that let the heat and thirst drag it out. A punishment, a message, or a game. He pulled the reins. Damn it. Whiskey huffed and turned back hooves, crunching through sand and bone-dry roots. Thomas dismounted slowly, knees cracking beneath him. The girl's face was half covered in dust. One eye blinked open barely. She was still alive. Barely. He knelt beside her, reached for the knot with calloused fingers, and said the first words he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. Someone wanted you to suffer. The girl's lips didn't move, but her eyes locked onto his. Not with fear, with recognition of pain, of betrayal, of a truth Thomas knew all too well. She wasn't dead yet, and maybe neither was he. Before he became a shadow riding through the desert, Thomas McCrae had a name people respected. Some even feared it. He wore the blue of the cavalry, once a war horse under him, and a Springfield rifle slung across his back. Back then, orders came easy, and right and wrong felt like lines drawn in the dirt, clean, clear, and always someone else's problem. But lines blur in smoke. In 1868, after a skirmish gone wrong along the southern edge of Apache territory, Thomas rode home with the stench of gunpowder still on his coat, and a look in his eyes his wife didn't recognize. Her name was Helen, and she was all soft strength, freckles, calloused hands, and the kind of laugh that warmed a man down to the bone. They had a boy, Jesse, who climbed rocks like a goat and believed his pa could lasso the moon if he tried. Then came the fire. The townsfolk said it was an accident, a tipped lantern. But Thomas knew different. Knew it from the way folks had stared at Helen when she returned from tending to a sick Apache child. The whispers, the sermons, the looks that burned colder than any flame. She didn't come out of that fire. And Jesse, only 17, too full of questions Thomas couldn't answer, rode off the next morning without a word, not even goodbye. After that, Thomas took to the hills, settled near an old miner's trail west of Dry Creek, built a shack with his hands, and lined it with silence. He stopped wearing blue, stopped talking to people, and started talking to his horse. Whiskey never judged him. Never asked why he woke screaming some nights, or why he sat by the fire clutching a scorched handkerchief, still marked with soot and blood. That piece of cloth was all that remained of Helen. He kept it in a small tin wrapped in oilskin, tucked beneath his bedroll like a prayer he couldn't speak. For 10 years, he didn't go near town. Not for supplies, not for Christmas. Not even when word reached that Jesse had joined the Union Pacific and was laying track through Wyoming. Maybe his son was alive. Maybe not. Thomas didn't ask. Didn't write. What would he say? That he'd failed to protect the only woman who ever believed in him. That he'd failed twice. So when he saw the girl in the sandskin, burnt wrists, torn breath shallow as wind, he didn't see a stranger. He saw a moment replayed. He saw Helen again calling for help no one gave. He saw Jesse looking back one last time from his saddle, waiting for his father to say something, anything. And he saw the kind of knot that doesn't kill quick. A message, a lesson, a punishment. Thomas untied the girl's hands, not because he was a good man, but because a long time ago he hadn't been good and someone else had paid the price. As he carried her toward whiskey, her head lolled against his chest like a child's, and he whispered more to himself than her. Not this time. The girl didn't wake for nearly a day. Thomas kept her in the shaded corner of his shack, where the breeze still remembered how to be kind. He fed her water in sips and broth by the spoonful, listening for any change in her breathing, waiting for the moment her eyes would open and tell him whether he'd saved a girl or just delayed a burial. When she stirred, it wasn't with a gasp or scream. It was a slow, quiet blink, like someone coming up from underwater. Her voice cracked like bark in a fire. "Where am I?" "You're not dead," Thomas answered, "yet." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back with a soft cry. Thomas moved a hand to her shoulder, not to comfort, just to steady. "I pulled you off that tree 2 days ago. You're in my place now. Nobody's gonna hurt you here." The girl's eyes searched the rough wood of the cabin. Her gaze paused at the rifle above the door, at the saddle gear in the corner, the tin of salve by her bed. Finally, her lips moved again. "Ellie. My name's Ellie." He gave her a nod. "Thomas." That was all. No last names, no questions. But Ellie had a story clawing its way out, and once it started, it came like floodwater. She'd been an orphan since 10 passed between households like a borrowed shovel. At 16, she was placed under the care of Reverend Mason, a man respected by the town, but feared by the girls who lived behind his doors. When Derek Kane, a wealthy landowner twice her age, came asking for a wife of virtue, Mason offered Ellie like a lamb at auction. When she refused, Kane turned sweet, promised escape, a future, a wagon ride to California. She believed him. He led her into the desert and trusted her like a calf, said he'd come back after the sun made her quiet, that he'd tell the town she'd run off with a band of Apache raiders, that he'd barely escaped. "They'll believe him," she said, staring at the roof. "He gives money to the church. I scrubbed their floors." Thomas didn't say anything. He just stood, walked outside, lit a cigarette with trembling hands. Kane. The name gnawed at something buried. Years back, Thomas had heard of him. Kane owned land just outside Rust Rock, paid bounty hunters to clear it of trouble. Trouble in Kane's language meant people without protection, drifters, orphans, Apache families. Anyone no one would miss. Thomas exhaled smoke that tasted like gunpowder and regret. Kane was coming, not just for the girl, for the lie he'd already planted. And if the girl showed her face in town, she wouldn't be welcomed back. She'd be judged, branded, maybe worse. That night, as the wind stirred the coals in the hearth, Ellie turned to him. "I'll leave in the morning," she whispered. "You've done enough." Thomas looked at her, really looked. The girl was skin and bones, wrists still wrapped in torn linen. She couldn't ride, could barely stand. And the desert wouldn't be kind a second time. "You leave now," he said softly. "You die. Then what?" Her voice cracked. "You gonna keep me here? Hide me like a secret?" "No." He rose, walked to a chest beneath the stove, opened it. Inside was an old revolver, a small bundle of letters bound in twine, and a cavalry badge dulled by time. He didn't take the gun. He took the badge, held it in his hand like it weighed more than iron. "Long time ago, I made a vow," he said. "No more blood, no more war." Ellie didn't speak. "But I also made another one I never kept." He looked over his shoulder, voice low, "that if I ever saw someone left to die again and I could stop it, I would." He placed the badge on the table between them. "You're not staying because I pity you." "Why then?" "Because someone out there wants you gone." He nodded toward the stars outside the window. "And I want him to know that not everybody does what he says." 3 days passed before Ellie could walk without gripping the doorframe. By then, Thomas had taught her how to boil coffee, the way desert men drink it, thick, black, bitter. She sipped it anyway, cradling the tin cup in her hands. Like warmth was something she hadn't known in years. He didn't ask her more. She didn't offer. but silence, when it lingers long enough, begins to press against the walls like a rising tide. It was Ellie who broke it first. There was a letter, she said one morning. I wrote it before I ran. To a woman named Mary Ann. Used to work with me. Told her everything. I put it in the church box. Thomas glanced up from sharpening his knife. What happened to it? Ellie shook her head. Never got a reply. He nodded slowly. Maybe we ought to go looking. That afternoon, Thomas rode alone into Rust Rock. It had been more than 10 years since he'd passed its dry fences and weather-beaten storefronts. Not much had changed. Still one dusty street and 100 watching eyes. He kept his hat low, didn't stop to speak. Folks whispered anyway about ghosts, about the man who lost everything and never came back. He didn't care. He tethered whiskey behind the chapel, slipped inside like a man returning to a crime scene. The church smelled like sweat and stale roses. No one saw him as he moved through the side hallway, past the pews and hymn books, into the vestry where donations and letters collected. The wooden box was still there, scratched crooked and locked with a simple latch. Thomas didn't hesitate. He snapped the latch open with a flick of his belt knife. Inside were envelopes, most innocent, some marked with coins or names written in delicate cursive. He flipped through them, fast eyes scanning for what he didn't know, until he saw it. A letter addressed only, Mary Ann, if you still remember me. Please read. The handwriting was shaky, ink blotched in the corners. He pocketed it, relatched the box, and walked out without looking back. That night by lamplight, he read it aloud. Ellie sat across from him, her hands curled around her knees. Dear Mary Ann, I think he'll hurt me. He told me if I didn't smile and obey, he'd say I seduced him. Reverend Mason told me it would be a blessing. The cane would keep me clean. But it doesn't feel clean. It feels like drowning with my eyes open. Thomas's voice faltered. He swallowed and continued. He says if I speak, no one will believe me. That no one ever does. Ellie stared at the floor. I wrote that 2 weeks ago, she whispered. I didn't even think it mattered anymore. It matters, Thomas said. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope like it was something sacred. But what neither of them knew was that Kane already knew she was alive. That morning, in a saloon filled with sour whiskey and smoke, Derek Kane paid 3 riders $10 each and a jug of firewater for a simple job. Find the girl, he said, and bring her back. Don't matter how. They rode before sundown. 2 days later, Thomas spotted them from a bluff, 3 silhouettes moving like coyotes across the valley, heading straight toward his shack. He turned back fast, breath tight in his chest. Inside, Ellie was tending the fire. We need to move, he said. Now. She blinked but didn't argue. Only asked where. He looked toward the canyon trail, narrow and steep, carved through ancient rock like a scar. They won't follow through the cut, he said. Too many places to get lost, too many ways to bleed. They packed light. A saddlebag of dried meat, 1 canteen, the letter, and an old Colt revolver Thomas hadn't touched in years. He gave it to her with steady hands. You ever use one of these? Ellie shook her head, then pointed at the ground, he said. But keep it close. By dusk, they were halfway up the pass. The wind howled between the rocks like it remembered blood. They camped in a shallow cave that smelled of old ash and dust. Ellie curled up beneath a saddle blanket, still gripping the letter. Thomas sat beside the fire, staring out into the black beyond the flames. You think we'll make it, she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a small scorched handkerchief with faded embroidery at the corner. The name Helen barely visible. She was kind, he said softly. Like you. Ellie looked up at him. Thomas didn't meet her gaze. She died because I waited too long to act. Thought silence would protect her. It didn't. A pause. Then Ellie voice, barely more than wind. You didn't wait this time. He nodded. No, I didn't. The first shot came before dawn. Thomas had always trusted the wind. It warned him when weather turned or when coyotes came sniffing too close. But that morning, it gave no sign. The stillness was too perfect. That's how he knew. The echo cracked across the canyon walls, sharp close. It didn't hit, but it was close enough to wake Ellie with a scream. "Stay down," Thomas hissed, yanking her behind a ledge of rock. His hand found the revolver on her belt and shoved it back into hers. "If I tell you to run, you run." They'd made it halfway through the Narrow's dangerous terrain, but familiar to Thomas from years of solitude. The only way out now was through the pass or down the steep slope behind them, and that fall would break bone before it saved skin. Another shot closer. He saw one of them now, a man in a gray duster rifle tucked against his shoulder, moving low and mean through the sagebrush. Kane didn't send trackers. He sent killers. Thomas pulled his old Henry rifle free from the saddle holster. It was oiled, loaded, and angry. "You remember how to breathe?" he asked Ellie. She nodded, trembling. "Good. Keep doing it." He rose just enough to sight, then fired. The gray coat jerked back, dropped. No time to see if he was dead. Another figure moved on the left flank, young too eager, charging too soon. Thomas waited until he was closer, then fired. The shot missed, not by aim, but by intention. He wasn't trying to kill, and maybe that was the mistake. The third man, he was different. Slow, careful, smart. He didn't shoot wild. He waited. And when Thomas rose for his second shot, that man's bullet found its mark. Thomas stumbled back, a sharp bite in his side. Not deep, but enough. Ellie caught him as he fell behind, cover her hands slick with his blood. No, don't you dare." He grunted, biting the pain. Not bad, just messy. But Ellie could see the truth. His face was white as sand. Sweat already glistened on his brow. "They'll circle us," he rasped. "Pin us in. They know the past, too." "Then what do we do?" He looked at her with something between sorrow and pride. "You run." She shook her head. "Run, Ellie." "No." "You don't?" "No." Her voice didn't tremble this time. "I watched someone walk away once. Let a man tell me my life wasn't worth fighting for. I won't let it happen again." Thomas stared at her. There was something new in her, now steel behind the eyes. "I can draw them off," she said. "I know this terrain now. You showed me. They'll kill you. They'll try." He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, the letter, and tucked it into her waistband. "If I don't make it," he said, "you show this to Sheriff Boyd. He's the only one in town who still remembers my name without spitting." Ellie nodded. Thomas looked at her like a man watching a memory walk away. Then he took his knife, dragged it along the stone wall behind him, letting the spark fall into a tuft of dried grass. Smoke curled fast and thick. "Go," he said, voice rough. She ran. The sound of hooves and shouting followed. Bullets sang past her, close enough to whisper death, but none hit. She dove through brambles, skirted a gully, and vanished into a thicket where even the sun got lost. Behind her, smoke rose from the rocks, and Thomas, wounded, bleeding, outgunned, waited. Kane arrived an hour later. He didn't bring more men. He didn't need to. He stood before Thomas, flanked by the last two riders, sneering down at the man who'd once been feared. "Well, look who crawled out of hiding," Kane drawled. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet," Thomas coughed. Kane stepped forward, kicked the rifle out of his reach. "You took what's mine." Thomas laughed, low and dry. "She was never yours, and she's long gone by now." Kane's face darkened. "I'll find her." "No," Thomas whispered, blood seeping into the dirt beneath him. "You won't." Kane raised his pistol, but something stopped him. A sound. Footsteps. A girl's voice, steady, sharp as flint. "You shoot him, and that letter hits the sheriff's desk before sundown." Kane turned. Ellie stood at the edge of the rocks, holding the revolver with both hands. Her aim was shaking, but her eyes weren't. "Try me," she said. Ellie's hands trembled, not from fear, not entirely, but from the weight of choice. She'd run her whole life from Reverend Mason, from Kane, from the quiet shame no one had ever helped her name. But not today. Today she stood. Kane squinted against the rising sun, lips curling into a mocking smile. "You don't have it in you," he said, stepping forward like a man approaching a skittish colt. "Put the gun down, girl. You'll hurt yourself." Thomas, bleeding and slumped against the canyon wall, opened his mouth to warn her to tell her to run again. But Ellie didn't move, didn't flinch. She took one step closer. "The letter's in the sheriff's hands by now," she said. "Even if you kill us both, you'll hang." Kane's smile cracked. For the first time, uncertainty bled through. One of his rider's older, wiry eyes, sunken from too many nights drunk, looked at Kane and then at Ellie. "You didn't say nothing about a letter." Kane barked, "She's bluffing." Ellie raised the gun a little higher. Her arms ached, her legs burned, but her voice held. "You're right," she said. "I am bluffing." Kane blinked. "But are you willing to bet your life that I'm not?" Silence. Even the wind held its breath. Kane's other man took a slow step back, then another. "This ain't worth it, Derek." Kane's eyes darted, calculating. His grip tightened on his pistol, still hanging by his side. Ellie saw it in his stance, that twitch, that flinch, that coiled fury. He was going to draw. But before he could move, a crack split the air. Thomas had fired from the ground, one hand barely steady, but his aim sure. The bullet hit Kane low in the hip, sending him sprawling with a grunt of pain. Ellie gasped, her own finger tightening, but it was over. Kane writhed on the ground, groaning, blood spreading in a dark bloom across the sand. Thomas let his rifle fall beside him, eyes closing from the exertion. The two riders didn't stay. They backed away, one dropping his rifle, the other tipping his hat like apology, and rode off down the canyon trail without a word. Ellie rushed to Thomas's side. His face was pale sweat beading along his temples. But when he opened his eyes, they still held fire. "You aimed low," she said, choking on a sob. He managed a dry smile. "Didn't want to kill him, just slow him down. You should have let me handle it." "You did." His voice was weak but clear. "You didn't run." She pressed the torn bandages tighter against his wound, her hand stained with his blood now. "I need to get you back to town," she said, panic rising. "The doc, he can—" "No." Thomas shook his head barely. "No towns, no doctors, no lawmen. Then what?" "Just sit with me for a while." Ellie hesitated, then leaned back against the canyon wall, her shoulder touching his. They sat in the hush of morning light. Kane's groans faded into the distance behind them. Birds began to stir in the brush. The desert, always impatient, moved forward like nothing had happened. Ellie looked over at Thomas, his breathing slower now, deeper. "I never got to say thank you," she said softly. "You just did," he murmured. A long pause, then almost inaudible. "I thought I'd die alone." Ellie reached for his hand. "You didn't, and neither did she." The desert doesn't mark graves. It swallows them. But sometimes it remembers. 2 weeks after the gunfire faded and Kane was left to limp back to his lies, Ellie rode into Rust Rock alone. Thomas had refused to go. Said he'd had enough of places where men wore hats but not honor. She brought with her only the truth tucked in a letter, signed by a hand that still shook and a badge too old to shine. The sheriff read it, listened to the silence that followed, and then nodded. Kane was arrested a week later in a gambling den outside El Paso, trying to buy silence with borrowed money. He didn't hang, but he never walked right again. Justice isn't always neat, but sometimes it limps home. Ellie stayed long enough to bury a name no one else remembered. She didn't know where Thomas had gone after that last sunrise. He left no note, no goodbye. Only a burnt handkerchief folded beside the coals, but months later, as autumn brushed gold across the hills, she returned to the place he called nowhere. The shack still stood, leaning stubborn, waiting. Inside, the hearth was cold, but beside it, someone had set a second chair. And on the table, a single mug. Clean, waiting, like maybe someone hadn't given up on company after all. Ellie unpacked her saddlebag, set wood to flame, lit the fire, and sat, not because she was lost, but because sometimes a girl who was left to die deserves a place to begin again. If this story stirred something quiet in you, something you haven't felt in a while, the kind of ache that isn't pain, just memory, then maybe you're the kind of soul this fire was built for. Leave a comment. Tell us what you'd do if you were her, or if you've ever been him. And if you'd sit here again, subscribe to this channel. We'll keep the coffee hot, and the next story even warmer.